Welcome, dear friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. A very good day to you. So, the topic of today's sharing, Dharma sharing, is the topic of sickness and death and how we can meet these challenges with grace and use them for liberation, for path. So, I'd like to begin by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, welcome again, everyone, and here we are, human beings, subject to old age, sickness, and death. And we can view these experiences as calamities, as unwanted, as in some way not okay, or we can view them through the eyes of the Dhamma and see how natural, how in their place, how appropriate, how inevitable they are. And we can use these experiences to catalyze our practice, to develop on the path for liberation, whether we're experiencing old age, sickness, and death in those around us or in ourselves, meeting these inevitable stages of life. I guess sickness is not inevitable. There are a few people who are physically well throughout their lives and die peacefully in their sleep, or just keel over one day in old age. But most of us, at some points in our lives, don't we experience some physical difficulties, some sickness, some disease, whether it be chronic, long-lasting, or whether sudden shocks, sudden changes happen for us. It's very likely that we're going to be facing some physical issues at some point in our lives. And if we're lucky and we get to live to old age, then of course we have the challenges of old age to meet and deal with. And isn't it the case that in old age, they talk about, don't they, the sort of stepwise deterioration that can happen? We can be cruising along in a certain way, certain degree of health and energy, and then boom, something happens and we've lost some functionality, or we've declined in some way in our abilities, in our energy perhaps, and then we recognize, oh, this is a permanent change. And so we then are cruising along again, but on a different level, a less able level. And then later on, boom, something else happens. We're down another step. We have a fall, or we get a sickness, and we find that we've lost a certain amount of our capacities again to another degree, and then we can go along a bit longer, and boom, something else will happen. And this is old age. And if we get to live a long life, we'll have many experiences of this kind. Yes, decline can be gradual, but it's often in this way, kind of stepwise decline. One shock after another, one loss after another, and we rise up and we deal with. If we're fortunate, we have the Dharma teachings to enable us to really meet these challenges in a very full and wise and compassionate way. And then, of course, death is inevitable for each one of us. And, the Buddha encouraged us to contemplate old age, sickness, and death as heavenly messengers, to see them as friends, to see them as useful, valuable contemplations, considerations, so that we're prepared, friends, so that we're ready, so that we've met them already. They're not unfamiliar to us. They don't shock and traumatize and horrify us when they appear in their fullness at the various stages of life. But we're meeting them, we're comfortable with them, we're ready, and we can even, have a sense of great purpose around these, we can say, challenges, because we know that these kinds of experiences of old age, sickness, and death can be like a spur for our practice. They can open doors for us. Why? Because we're facing dukkha head on. And this is our opportunity then to see whether there's any further letting go that needs to be done, whether there's any more work that needs to be done. Is there fear here? Is there resistance? Am I trying to move away from this inevitable, natural happening? And we have a chance to really look deeply into the mind and root out the causes of suffering. That is desire for things to be other than the way they are, and aversion towards the way things are, and the ignorance that underlies these root defilements. So this is our chance then. We can say old age, sickness, and death truly are opportunities then for us. It's like the Chinese character, isn't it, for danger is also the character for opportunity. When the difficulties come, we get to make the most of these opportunities for liberation. If we're practicing well, if we're prepared, if we have a daily practice of bringing in Maranasati, contemplation of death, contemplation of sickness, contemplation of old age, for others, in relation to others, and also for this body, to picture how this body will be in 50 years' time, or maybe a bit longer for some of us, maybe sooner for some of us. How will this body be after death? It's bound to die. How will it be? What will happen? And consider it, that this body has this trajectory. And it's surprising to me, and probably to many of you, how peaceful these contemplations can be. We don't necessarily find ourselves upset, disturbed, averse. We may have layers of these kinds of feelings around death. We most likely do. But if we bring to mind every day Maranasati, contemplation of death, then we find that it becomes something more peaceful. It's calming, because it's real. This is a real, inevitable event, and we're preparing ourselves, and we can feel grounded in that. We can feel safe in that refuge of Dhamma when we contemplate death. So how interesting. So I'd like to share with you some excerpts from suttas, some teachings, to investigate the teachings around dealing with sickness and death. And there are so many cases of people who approach the Buddha or his disciples in trauma, in shock, who had experienced loss and didn't know how to cope with that. And so I think it's really interesting to look at such cases and to see the immediate Dhamma teachings that are offered and the results for those beings, the healing and the insight and the direction that's so needed at such times. It's never too late to open to the practice it's ideally better if we prepare ourselves for these events, these losses, these changes, major changes in our lives. But if that hasn't happened, let's see how people can be encouraged to wake up. And at such times, intense times of suffering, the opportunity to really open to the Dharma, of course, is very great. The possibilities there for the insight to really go deeply into the mind and for great change to happen, great change of attitude. So I'd like to share with you, I'll just read from the sutta that I've got here, Anguttara 550. This is called Narada Sutta. This sutta is about a king called Munda, and he has lost his wife, the queen. Her name was Bada, and he is distraught. So King Munda says, from the time of her death, he did not bathe or anoint himself. He didn't eat his meals or apply himself to his work. Day and night he brooded over Queen Bada's death. He addressed his treasurer and he asked him, please put her corpse in an iron case and fill it up with oil, and then enclose that in another case so that I can view her body for longer. So very poignant inability here for the king to let go of his beloved. How we can relate to this. It occurred to the treasurer, the king's servant. His wife has passed away and he is in great distress. Can I help him? And he thinks of a monk, Narada, who's living nearby, and he goes to see him and he asks him about the king and what he can do to help the king, and can the king come and visit this monk for some teachings. And Narada thinks this is a good idea, gives his consent, and so they in the end arrange a meeting. The king goes in his chariots and goes into the forest, has to get out of the chariot on his feet and walk to the place where Bhikkhu Narada's meditating. And when he approaches him, Narada gives him this teaching. He says to him, great king, there are 5 things that cannot be had by any ascetic or Brahmin, by any god or Mara or Brahma or anyone in the world. What 5? That someone liable to old age should not grow old. That someone liable to sickness should not get sick. That someone liable to death should not die. That someone liable to ending should not end. That someone liable to perishing should not perish. An unlearned ordinary person has someone liable to old age who grows old, but they don't reflect on old age. It's not just me who has someone liable to old age who grows old. All sentient beings have someone liable to old age who grows old. As long as sentient beings come and go, they pass away and are reborn. If I were to sorrow, wail, and lament, beating my breast and falling into confusion, just because someone liable to old age gets old, I'd lose my appetite and my physical appearance would deteriorate. My work wouldn't get done, my enemies would be encouraged, and my friends would be dispirited. And so when someone liable to old age grows old, they sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. This is an unlearned, ordinary person, struck by sorrow's poisoned arrow. who only mortifies themselves. And in the same way, when we're not ready, we're not prepared, we're not open to the Dhamma, the reality of death, of sickness, of perishing, of ending, in the same way we suffer. And such profound suffering, isn't it? The suffering of loss of the loved one. And of course, the Bhikkhu Narada goes on to speak about the learned noble disciple has someone liable to old age who grows old. And they reflect, it's not just me who has someone liable to old age who grows old. For all sentient beings have someone suffering from old age, know someone who's sick, who's passed away. Many cases, probably in each of our lives, of these experiences. If I were to sorrow and wail and lament, beating my breast and falling into confusion, just because someone liable to old age grows old, I'd lose my appetite and my physical appearance would deteriorate. My work wouldn't get done. My enemies would be encouraged. My friends would be dispirited. And so when someone liable to old age, liable to sickness, liable to death, when these things come to pass, we don't sorrow and lament, beating our breasts and falling into confusion. A learned noble disciple has drawn out sorrow's poisoned arrow, has drawn out sorrow's poisoned arrow. Sorrowless, free of thorns, that noble disciple only extinguishes themselves, only inclines toward nibbana, to freedom, to letting go. So isn't it, friends, if we have, and we surely will, and have had these experiences of losing someone close to us through old age, sickness, and death, we can appreciate that this is an opportunity for us to really deeply let go and to willingly face the reality. And yes, there's a place for sorrow. One could say it's natural, for the body to grieve. It's even a physical process. In my experience, there will be tears, there will be sort of sobbing that can happen. There will be manifestations of grief. But in the heart, in the mind of a practitioner, there is this ability, isn't there, to be aware of that, to feel the grief, but not be the grief, to recognize that it's a natural, transformative flow of energy, and one can ride the waves of grief. One can fully experience loss in a mindful way and notice how it's a flow, it's a movement. There's constant change within that. There's letting go. And this is the Dhamma, and it reveals to us layer after layer of conditioning, and we get to purify, to relieve ourselves of perhaps many, many lifetimes of suffering, friends, when we're able to face these experiences, fully. We're here for them. We're not trying to deny them. We're not trying to hold on to the corpses. We're willing to let them go. So another very poignant teaching, the case of Kisa Gotami. Many of you will have heard of Kisa Gotami. There are two sort of commentaries, stories about her experience. The famous mustard seed story is one of them. Kisa Gotami, a woman who has a baby who dies unexpectedly, maybe something like a cot death or just inexplicable death of a baby. How difficult, how unfortunate, one could say, for the mother. how painful, devastating. And Kisa Gotami is unable to accept what's happened. So she carries the baby around in the story. She carries it on her breast, the corpse of this baby. She can't let it go. And people are so sorry for her. They invite her to approach the Buddha. How fortunate the Buddha is in her town. So she finds herself in front of the Buddha. And what does she do? Because she's in denial, she begs the Buddha, you're a fully enlightened person. You must be able to do something to bring my baby back to life. Please do something. And the Buddha so compassionately, so kindly, doesn't try to put her straight, He invites her to a kind of mission. So your mission is this, to go get a mustard seed from every house in the town and then bring those mustard seeds to me and I'll be able to do something to help you. So at this point, she's probably imagining, as we would, he's going to perform some sort of magic. Wonderful. I can do that. And he says to her, but before you collect a mustard seed from anybody, from any household, you need to ask them first, has anyone in this household died? Do you know anyone who's died? If you do, I can't receive a mustard seed from you. And so this is her task. And she, as many of you will know this story, she goes from household to household, day and night, with the baby on her breast, begging for the mustard seeds. And everyone's willing to give her a mustard seed. But when she asks the question, has anyone died here? The answer inevitably is yes. Of course, we know someone who's died, one of our relatives, many of our friends, somebody's died here. I'm sorry. And so she slowly was able to recognize the shared quality of her experience. She's not alone. Isn't it the case, friends, when we are deeply upset by anything, traumatized by anything, one of the qualities of that sense of trauma is feeling alone in it. Nobody else is experiencing this. Only I know what this feels like. No one else can share this. I can't express this and be understood. This is one of the aspects of great suffering. And so for Kisa Gotami, she could sort of slowly come to terms with the fact that this experience that she's having, however devastating and traumatic it feels, is an experience that so many others have had. And even in probably, I imagine, in the course of her wandering around the town, she would have met other women who had lost their babies and perhaps had some conversations with them. And so eventually she makes her way back to the Buddha, no mustard seeds to give him, but she's come to this place of understanding, and the Buddha could teach her the Dhamma. And she was so open to it that she became a bhikkhuni, practiced for liberation, and became an arahant in her lifetime. So painful, and yet this experience, the doorway to nibbana, dukkha, suffering and the end of suffering. And the other background story to Kisa Gotami, which is probably more consistent with her verses. She has verses in the Therigatha poem of liberation. And in this poem, which I'll read some of to you, she's actually telling a different story, a story we also have of great loss, where there was a time of great heavy rainfall, a heavy monsoon, and a young woman pregnant trying to get to her parents' place to give birth. And with her, she has her husband and her infant toddler. And they go on the journey, and unfortunately, before they get to her parents' place, just as with the Buddha's mother, she gives birth out in the countryside, and little baby's born. And they start to, once she's given birth and recovered from that, they start to make their way towards the parents, continue their journey. And then this great rain comes, and she sends her husband to go and try and make a shelter for them from the storm. He goes off to cut some wood, some bamboo, and in the process of doing this, he's bitten by a snake and he dies. And poor Kisa Gotami is left with the 2 children in the rain. The only way she can shelter them is with her body. Somehow she gets through the night, and they get through the night. And in the morning, she looks for her husband and finds his corpse. So distraught, she continues on her way. Because of all the flooding, there's a river that's formed, and she has to get across it. And so she figures that the best thing to do would be to ask the toddler to sit on the bank, and she makes her way across with the baby, manages to just about get there, puts the baby down on the far bank, and goes back for the infant. And in this process, 2 terrible things happen. A bird of prey catches her baby and takes it away. And as she turns back to the baby to try to rescue it from the bird, she's shouting, waving her arms around, and the little toddler thinks she's calling him or her. And so they plunge into the river to get to mum, and they're swept away by the current. And so this woman loses both her infant and her newborn baby, having already lost her husband. So distraught, traumatized, distressed, she slowly makes her way to her parents, gets there, only to discover that their home has been hit by lightning, and both her parents and her brother perished in the fire that the lightning caused, and the home is destroyed. So this is a story so extreme in its, terrible nature of loss. First the husband, the 2 children, and then the entire family and the home. And yet, we can reflect, can't we, friends, that these kinds of things happen. These kinds of things are happening to people today, now, in war zones, at times of famine. And the losses that people experience are extreme. And so, this story seems exceptionally shocking. And yet. These are some of the verses of Kisa Gotami, written as an Arahant Bhikkhuni, as a fully liberated monk. She says, I was on the road and about to give birth when I saw my husband dead. I gave birth there on the road before I'd reached my own house. My 2 children have died, and on the road my husband lies dead. Oh, woe is me. Mother, father, and brother, all burning up on the same pyre. Oh, woe is you whose family is lost. The suffering you've undergone has no measure. You have been shedding tears for many thousands of lives. While staying in the charnel ground, I saw my son's flesh being eaten, with my family destroyed, condemned by all, and my husband dead. I realized freedom from death. I've developed the Noble Eightfold Path, leading to freedom from death. I've realized extinguishment and seen in the mirror of the Dhamma. I've plucked out the dart, laid down the burden, and done what needed to be done. The senior nun, Kisa Gotami, her mind released, said this. Ayya. So there we have it, the path that opened up for her through these vicissitudes, through these traumas. We can feel sometimes that there is no way to recover. There's no possibility to ever overcome the kinds of sufferings that we can experience through loss of the loved ones and through our own also experiences of sickness, old age, impending death. And yet here we have, this hymn of kind of salvation, redemption, path opened up for her. So it's at these very times that we can really appreciate the teachings of the Buddha, of course. There is old age, there is sickness, there is death, and these are inevitable. And we can either suffer as a result of these natural occurrences, or we can face them mindfully and investigate the Dhamma here. Courageously, one could say, nobly, open our hearts to the reality here and allow ourselves to feel what we feel and to recognize that there's nothing in this experience that's personal. There's nothing in this experience that's unique. This is to be known by the wise. And to consider deeply, the changing phenomena all around us and within us. When we experience grief, we can experience the flow because there's such a process of transformation. We can't hold on to that which has been lost. We can only open to the change. And we resist change. Oftentimes, don't we? We resist it, with all our hearts and minds sometimes because we don't want to face death. We don't want to face loss. But when they come, this opportunity is there for us. And as I said before, if we're wise, of course, we avoid the trauma, we avoid the shock, we avoid the resistance because we prepare ourselves, we're ready, we're open to meet these events when they naturally unfold and to see them then as a natural unfolding, as part of life, as part of the reality of the way things are. And when we can open to the way things are, of course, there is such peace available to us. Acceptance is going to be the attitude towards difficult situations, and we will gain so much wisdom and insight, so much compassion as the heart breaks and we allow it to open, to shatter, to recognize that there's nothing we have to hold on to. Just let it all fall apart and notice how freedom is to be found in this experience of letting go. So to prepare ourselves, friends, is so important, and it doesn't matter how old we are. We can, if we're lucky, when we're young, open and appreciate death, sickness, old age, and bring them in, bring them home, be with them in our youth, and then we can really find our way through life a very smooth and easeful path. Practice is the way to make peace with Dhamma. Be the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, friends. So I'd like to share with you another sutta on this subject of preparing. This is called Future Perils, and it's Anguttara, number 578. The Buddha says, seeing 5 future perils is quite enough for us to meditate diligently, keenly, resolutely, for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, for realizing the unrealized. What are these 5? So the 5 future perils that we are invited to consider, to contemplate, to meet. 1. Reflecting, currently I'm young, I have black hair, I'm blessed with youth, in the prime of life. But there will come a time when this body is struck with old age. When you're old, overcome with old age, it's not easy to focus on the instructions of the Buddhas, and it's not easy to frequent remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest. Before that unlikable, undesirable, and disagreeable thing happens, I'd better preempt it by rousing up energy for attaining the unattained, achieving the unachieved, and realizing the unrealized. That way, when old age happens, I'll live comfortably, even though I'm old. This is the first peril. The second peril. Currently, I'm rarely ill or unwell. My stomach digests well, being neither too hot nor too cold, but just right and fit for meditation. But there will come a time when this body is struck by sickness. When you're sick, overcome by sickness, it's not easy to practice at such a time or to be in solitude. Before that happens, I better preempt it by arousing energy for practice now. And in that way, when sickness comes, I'll be comfortable even though I'm sick. The third future peril. Right now, there's plenty of food, good harvests. It's easy to get food. It's easy to keep going. In the case of monastics, by collecting alms, or for all of us to acquire the nourishment that we need. But there will come a time of famine. There'll be bad harvests, when it's hard to get alms food and not easy to keep going by collecting alms. In a time of famine, people move to where there's plenty of food, and they live cramped and crowded together. When you live cramped and crowded together, it's not easy to focus on the Buddha's teachings. It's not easy to find solitude. Before that unlikable, undesirable thing happens, I'd better preempt it by rousing up energy for practice now, so that when a famine comes, I'll be comfortable even in that famine. And fourthly, we can reflect. Currently, people live in harmony. They appreciate each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, regarding one another with kindly eyes. We live in a time of peace. Where we are, if we're lucky, we live in a time of security, safety. But there will come a time of peril due to turmoil in the wilds. And so the country folk mount their vehicles and flee everywhere. There will be refugees, there will be migrations, there will be loss of home and place. Times of great danger. People move to where there's some sanctuary to be found, and there they live crowded and cramped together. When you live crowded and cramped together, it's not so easy to practice then. Before that happens, I better preempt it by practicing now, so that when that time comes, I'll live comfortably, even in a time of peril. And the fifth reflection is the reflection on Sangha. Currently, the Sangha lives in harmony, appreciating one another. But there will come a time of schism in the Sangha. And when that happens, it's very difficult to focus on the Buddha's teachings and practice for liberation. I'd better preempt that by practicing now, so that if and when a schism happens, there's difficulty and quarreling in the Sangha, that I will be able to practice comfortably even at such a time. So these future perils we can consider. And again, it's this encouragement, just as the 5 reflections, old age, sickness and death, ending and perishing, reflections. In the same way, we can consider, perhaps in the broader sense, that there can be times when here there's sickness, old age, death to face, but also perhaps on a more grand scale, there can be famines, there can be tumult, turmoil, war, fighting, quarreling, lack of safety in the world. We can lose our homes. Climate change can bring cataclysms to people and require them to flee. Wars, fighting over resources, time when food starts to run out. All these possibilities are there, friends, aren't they? And we can prepare now by practicing well and developing the qualities of wisdom, compassion, and equanimity, so that when these events come to pass, we will be able to be peaceful in the midst of the turmoil. We'll be able to be practicing, following the Eightfold Path, and also supporting others in their practice. So this is, again, an encouragement, isn't it, this sutta, for us to, in a way, look ahead or wise up to the inevitable trajectory of this life and perhaps of all of our lives, to be ready to meet these, we can say vicissitudes, or we can say heavenly messengers, these opportunities, these dangers when they arise. There's one more sutta that I'd like to share with you. This is another example from the many examples in the Pali Canon of people who have come to the Buddha, who have not prepared for these shocks that they then are afraid of, old age, sickness and death. They're not trained in viewing these events as natural, as inevitable, as to be accepted, to be used for practice, for liberation. And so they come to the Buddha, these 2 Brahmins. This is a Anguttara 352. 2 Brahmins come to the Buddha. They're elderly and senior, advanced in years. They've reached the final stage of life. It says here they're 120 years old. They go up to the Buddha, these 2 elderly Brahmins, bow to him and ask him, we're old and we've reached the final stage of life, 120 years old. We have not done what is good and skillful. We have not made a shelter from fear. Advise us, Master Gotama, instruct us. It will be for our lasting welfare and happiness. So they're coming at the very end of their lives to seek Dhamma support, Dhamma teachings. Wonderful, you know, wonderful humility to recognize that they can learn from this young, this much younger person, presumably, and they're open at this point to guidance, spiritual guidance. How wonderful. But how late, how far advanced their journey through life. The Buddha says to them, indeed, Brahmins, you're old, elderly, and senior, and you haven't done what's good and skillful, nor have you made a shelter from fear. This world, the Buddha says, this world is burning. This world is burning with old age, sickness, and death. But restraint here, restraint by way of body, speech, and mind, is the shelter, is the protection, the refuge, the haven for the departed. So he's advising them to practice restraint. And he says in verses to them, when your house is on fire, you rescue the pot that's useful. not the one that's burned. As the world is on fire with old age and death, you should rescue by giving, for what's given is rescued. The restraint practiced here of body, speech, and mind leads the departed to happiness, as the good deeds done while living. Ayya. So here the Buddha's telling them, yes, you're not prepared. Yes, you're going to be afraid of death because of that. What can you do? What can we do, friends, to find ourselves safety, to find refuge, to find a sense of fearlessness when approached by old age, sickness, and death? And this teaching is relevant for every one of us, is it not? How beautiful, this encouragement from the Buddha to practice restraint, to let go of sense desires, and to give the pot that is not burned. What can we do for ourselves to help ourselves to find a place of safety? Let go, let it all go. Give, chaga, this quality of not just letting go, but giving away, giving out. So this is really beautiful, and anyone and everyone can do this. The householders can do this so easily. Give away, be generous, give material things. And we can all do this in terms of our heart, to give kindness, give compassion, give generously of our time, give our attention to others, be selfless, give away our sense of what we need and open to the needs of others. To give is our great safety. And this is a teaching given to two very elderly people who are saying that they've not lived such great, wholesome lives. But of course, it's a teaching that we can all really take to heart because it's relevant for everyone. This is the beginning of the path for all of us. Generosity, dana, parami, to be generous, to be selfless, to give, to practice then for all of us, to find our refuge, to find our safety, to be able to face these vicissitudes of life, old age, sickness, and death, or one could say these opportunities for practice, to be ready, to be resourced in facing these. We can practice the Eightfold Path: right speech, right action, right livelihood, right understanding, right view, right intention, right practice, samadhi, stillness, mindfulness, applying energy, right energy for practice. This is our way of finding safety, finding refuge, so that these huge changes that are inevitably coming our way are not a problem for us. They're not a trauma. They don't cause us to be upset. We don't rail against our fate. We don't even consider it to be ours. We're open to anicca, dukkha, anatta, the reality of change, inevitability of change, the suffering that is to be understood, and the letting go, seeing that these experiences are not personal. There's nothing unique about them. They're natural. There's actually nothing to hold on to. There's nothing that is lost ultimately. There's nothing that is ours to lose. And so the teachings of the Buddha inform us and encourage us to be very curious, to be very ready, willing to meet old age, sickness, and death, and to embrace them, welcome them, open our hearts wide to them and allow them to teach us the Dhamma, And then, friends, we will learn and gain wisdom, compassion, insight, equanimity, and ultimately freedom, freedom from all suffering. We just have to make that shift our attitude from holding on to the sense of self and therefore the sense of suffering, to letting go of that and seeing the Dhamma. There you are. So thank you so much for your kind attention and patient listening. I'm going to have a little look in the chat and see if there's any questions or comments to share. Thank you very much for your kind greetings, friends. Lovely to see familiar names. Thank you for your kind words and greetings from all over. I've got a comment here from Christopher. Okay, I can't read it all right now, so I'll just share it with you and we'll see where it takes us. Thank you, Christopher. Seeking your comments, which is unrelated to today's talk. Buddha faces two antagonists. Baka, a Brahma, who believes that that's a god, believes that his attainment is the highest there is, and Mara, who wants to keep Baka under his power by allowing Baka to maintain his deluded opinion. So Mara is the personification of delusion, of ignorance, of all that is unwholesome, really. So Mara wants to keep Baka under his power and to prevent the Buddha from sharing his awakened knowledge with others. Of the two, Mara is the more insidious, a point illustrated by the fact that Mara always speaks through someone else and never directly shows. Okay, I haven't got any more there from you, Christopher. So thank you for this. How can I weave this into today's talk? I'm always interested to see how, the Dharma is so rich, abundant, all-encompassing. It's like an ocean, isn't it, friends? And so let's look at this in the light of facing up to the reality of our existence. Baka was, being a god, was quite unaware of his mortality. The gods have such an extensive lifespan that they really have no idea of death. And when it comes, we're told, it comes very suddenly. And it's a shock of epic proportions, friends. For a god to meet their death, the only way that they can really go is down. So they fall, literally. Both devas and gods can have the experience of a very sudden change in their form or their mind, comes on very quickly, something's disintegrating and they fall. And we perhaps all have some inkling of what this might be like. But because of the nature of their existence, they are, in a way, conditioned to coming to this place of great loss and great trauma. And so it's the, in a way, Achilles heel of the gods. It's the shadow that's lurking in the background for the gods. The gods are not immortal. The gods are also subject to rebirth, birth and death, the cycle of samsara. And so we can really reflect on this, because in many religions there's an aim to go up, to the highest realms, to the heavens, to be a god, to be one with God, to meet God. And yet in the Buddha's teaching, we can appreciate that this is not the end, that we want to pursue. This is not the salvation that we're seeking. We don't want to go up, because that which goes up inevitably, in the end, after maybe a very, very long time, however, it goes down. This is the cyclical nature of samsara. And so it really is worth reflecting on that inclination, which is a very strong inclination in us. It's a fetter in us to seek the higher experience, more bliss, more well-being, longer life, health, endless delights in the heavenly realms. It's a very natural inclination in us to want to seek these things as spiritual seekers, but we don't want to fall for that, because this is Mara in its most abundant manifestation, the Mara that entices us to more ignorance through this kind of seeking. We want to let go of seeking anything at all, friends. We want to let go of striving for more pleasant experiences of any kind whatsoever, however refined and ecstatic they may be. So for the spiritual seeker, this is really important. And I appreciate you bringing this in, Christopher, that I could weave this in, because we want to let go of those inclinations, friends. Let go, let go, let go. Let go of everything. Let go of the good, let go of the bad. Let go of the pleasant, let go of the unpleasant. Seek through letting go. Not this, not that. In this way, we can find our way inexorably to Nibbana, to freedom, to true happiness, true peace, true well-being. Thank you, Christopher. And I have a comment here from Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. Says, there have been so many experiences of sickness and death in my life that I have a mixture of true acceptance and some numbness to it as well. Any advice for sorting through this? Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, it's very natural for us to want to turn away from extreme suffering. We get overwhelmed sometimes by loss and change. And this is something to consider very compassionately. The mind will shy away from overwhelm. And yet, as practitioners, we don't want to rest with that. There's a place for gentle investigation. And so slowly, gently, very compassionately, with a lot of loving kindness, we can feel out places of numbness, places of where we sort of know, we sense that we're unable at this point to fully grieve. We're unable to fully work through some suffering, and yet it's there for us. And so to gently bring to mind perhaps an example, a person who we've lost, bring to mind an upsetting experience that we've had, bring to mind the losses that we're experiencing through our own ill health, that stepwise process where we just know we're never going to get back to the health that we experienced when we were younger, before this illness, to really bring up these experiences, whatever the experience may be for you, Rebecca, or experiences, and just to gently, compassionately consider, how is it feeling now? How does it feel when I remember, when I bring this to mind? And sit with that and open to that, and just allow, whatever feelings are there. And so we can explore these numb places gently. It's often a case of, it's kind of like looking at the edges, isn't it? Looking at the edges and just slowly and gently approaching, and with great care, and bringing in the Brahmaviharas, bringing in compassion, bringing in loving kindness, softly approaching. In this way, we can pay attention to these numb areas, give them time, give them space, and slowly but surely, we get to investigate throughout the fullness of our experiences. we get to understand, stand under that suffering, and then the path just opens up wider and wider for us. So this is my encouragement to you it's okay to have numb, closed down, shut off feelings. It's the mind's way of protecting itself, but to bring up the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma and just be willing to allow these numb areas to be seen, to reveal themselves gradually with great kindness, with great compassion. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, Charles Lee says, I hadn't realized that Kisa Gotami and Patachara had overlap. Yeah, it's interesting, Charles Lee. We have origin stories, commentaries about Kisa Gotami, these two different stories, and then Patachara is one of those stories that relates to Patachara, or is it Kisa Gotami? It's a bit of a tangle in the commentaries. What I like about that is that, in fact, the commentaries shift and change. Stories are perhaps created later, we can say, around the Pali Canon teachings, which are the closest we are to the Buddha's teachings, the words of the Buddha himself. What's interesting is that none of the people the bhikkhus often, who made the commentaries, have changed the Pali Canon. So you'll get glitches, you'll get discrepancies between the commentaries and the canon, but it's always in the interest, it seems, of preserving the Pali Canon, not changing that. So how wonderful, that nobody, it would seem, has wanted to manipulate the Pali Canon to fit the commentaries. Rather, the commentaries can be manipulated to try to fit the Pali Canon in all different ways. This is what the study of these texts reveals. So how wonderful that there's always been, hopefully as much as possible, a wish to preserve the teachings, the early Pali Canon. Of course, the teachings have changed over time, and there has been a lot of material added in. But I suspect that because of this honouring of the early texts, not a lot has been removed intentionally. Thank you, Chelsea, for your comment. Okay, we're out of time, friends. So I just want to share very briefly. I'll just zip through the remaining comments for us to share with much appreciation to you all for your sharings. Dharmika, why people are scared of old age? Why are they scared of death? Good question. If we practice well, we have no reason to be afraid of these occurrences, these opportunities. If we are afraid of them, there's no reason to berate ourselves for that, but just apply our hearts to the practice, follow the Eightfold Path, and allow that willingness to devote ourselves to the practice to do its work and relieve us of our fears and concerns. I think that might, I hope, answer your question, Nico. The way you've given the teaching, 5 future perils. Can I explain more? Rousing energy for practice now. Bring up the sense of urgency, Nico. Bring up the sense of urgency. Contemplate death, contemplate sickness, contemplate old age, and allow the energy of these reflections to meet your practice, to enliven your practice, so that we're all practicing, friends, with a burning desire to be free from suffering. Thank you, Nico. Okay, I think the others are just super kind comments. Thanks, everyone. And yes, thank you, Kit. Just to share with you Kit's comment. Someone who has a dear grandmother with advancing Alzheimer's. These messengers are potent. Indeed, Kit. I'm caring for a 90-year-old father and have an 86-year-old mother here with me, and they're teaching me every day. And it's just so beautiful, the Dharma that's available here to be with heavenly messages, elderly people. Yes. And finally, Karuna, the monastic cat cuddler. Sometimes Maranasati increases our attachments, as in, I don't have much time left, I should spend time with this loved one. It's good that this could be practiced as a form of giving. Indeed, Karina. I think that the more we give of our time, of our energy, of our kindness, the more we develop in Dhamma. There's really no need to complicate any further. It's a very simple equation. The more you give, the more you develop. So let's be very free in our giving, friends. Give whatever you can. All that is not given is lost. Thank you so much, friends. Let's finish by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha, with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, 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 anumodana.